In this video we're going to tie a little fly called the EP micro crab. This is one of Puglisi's small crab patterns. First thing we're going to do is start off the Gamakatsu SC15 number 2 hook and some Veevus 6/0 fluorescent Chartreuse thread. You can also use a 140 denier thread. And the first material we're going to add to the hook is going to be some medium-sized Beadchain eyes. And you can either use silver, like we are today, or some gold. You can also use black if you're going for a more stealthy look. And you just want to make sure that those are nice and secure on the shank of the hook. You can add a little bit of super glue at this point if you like, or you can just kind of wait to the end. Then we're going to take our thread and we're going to wrap it down the bend of the hook just a little ways. And then we're going to add just a little bit of flash. You can use a couple different types of flash. You can use just regular Krystal flash, or you can use some Midge flash. It's a little finer, and either will do the trick. And just a few strands, just enough to add a hint of flash to the fly. And you can either use pearl, which is kind of the standard, or you can match the color of the fly that you're tying. So if you're tying a tan micro crab, you can use some bonefish tan Krystal flash, or some olive if you're tying an olive one, or you can just use pearl. Pearl's kind of just the standard. And then you can kind of twist all those little fibers together. Now we're ready for the claws. And for the claws, we're going to use some EP Silky fibers. They're just a little finer. They move a little bit more in the water than your standard EP fiber. But you can substitute EP fiber if you like. I'm actually using the 3D version here, which kind of has some bits of brown and sand and tan all kind of mixed together. It makes it, I think, just look a little more lifelike. We're just going to cut a little strand here, about 1/4 of the width or diameter of a pencil. And then we're going to just take our fingers here and we're going to pull out a few of the fibers kind of from the blunt cut that we just made. And then when you twist them all together, it'll just kind of add a nice little taper to the end of those fibers. And you can kind of just twist them and rough them up, and then you'll have a nice little taper. Just like that. And we want our claws to be about 1.5 times the hook shank. So I just kind of roughly measure it out there on the hook shank. It's best to make them probably a little bit longer than you think you need to. You can always trim the ends, but if you tie them in too short, then there's no adding any material back on or going back. So I always generally err a little on the longer side. That way you can fix it if you're a little off. And you're going to tie these in here on each side of the hook. And if you want a little bit of separation, you can kind of pull the claw and the flash away from each other and put a wrap in between them. And that'll just help kind of add a little bit of separation and let those claws stick out to the side a little bit more. And then we're just going to repeat what we just did here on the other side of the fly. Making sure that the claws are the same length. You don't want to end up with a lopsided claw on one side. So before you tighten everybody down, just roughly kind of eyeball it. Make sure that you're at least in the ballpark of them being nice and even. Then you can do the same thing to add a little bit of separation between those claws, just to wrap a thread in between it and the crystal flash. And you can always do another one on the other side if that makes it look any better. There we are. Then you can just kind of even up the portion between the back here and the body, just making sure that you have a nice even surface to wrap the body on. So at this point we're ready to wrap the body. You can use a few different materials or techniques for this. The initial technique was taking silky fibers and stacking them one little bundle at a time, but Puglisi has come out with these brushes which are a little easier to use. I've noticed he started to use them quite a bit too. I'm just using a tan streamer brush, and we're just going to basically use this to build the body. So I'm just going to tie it in here at the back and wrap my way forward, and if you have an extra little hunk of wire there, you can get in there with the little wire cutter and cut it out of there. Now our first set of legs is going to be towards the back here a little bit, so I'm just going to take my thread and drop it roughly where I want my first set of legs to go. And then I'm just going to take that streamer brush and just kind of lay those fibers back as I wrap the streamer brush. Now you can just have a little brush handy. That'll really help get those fibers to lay down where you want them. The trick here is to get nice tight wraps, one next to each, one right up against the other, to get a nice full dense body. That's really the trick with these brushes, is one wrap right in front of the other. That way you won't be able to kind of see the wire. You'll get a nice full body on your crab. Now once I get to basically where my thread is and where I want to tie in those legs, you can just kind of fold the brush back and out of the way. The wire will kind of help keep it out of your way. And then we're going to take some rubber legs. Now you can use a few different types of rubber legs. You can use Loco legs, some barred crazy legs. Some new legs just came out though, Chicone's barred crusher legs, and I'm going to use the micro size. They're kind of the perfect size for these flies. And I'm going to use a brown and clear version of it. And you want to use the entire leg, the full length. That way when we go to trim the fly, it'll make things a lot easier if you have a full length of leg rather than just some little short legs that kind of get hidden in the fly. So you're going to use the whole thing, and you're going to tie these in on each side. You kind of have to finagle them around to get them to go where you want them to go. Each side of the fly. You don't want them on the top or the bottom, you want them just directly on each side. So you just kind of wrap them in to where you want them. Then you're going to wrap your thread forward to where you're going to want the next set of legs. And you're going to grab your brush again and just basically resume what we were doing. Just take it and carefully wrap it forward, nice dense wraps, one right in front of the other. Have your brush handy. Oh, and if you grab a leg every once in a while, make sure you don't wrap the leg in with the body. So you got to be really careful to dodge those legs and keep them to each side. And then when you get to the next spot for your next set of legs, again, just take the brush, kind of fold it back out of the way, and we're ready for our next set of legs. And just repeat that process 2 more times. Making sure that those legs fall on each side of the crab. And come forward a little more. And these brushes sure make it a lot faster and easier. Even though this kind of looks like a lot of dodging and work, it's still easier than doing it the original way that Puglisi used to tie them. At least I think it's a little easier. The stacking, I guess you get a little more kind of control, but it takes a lot more kind of materials management and prep and just really just time. So these brushes have kind of really been a game changer as far as the speed that you're able to tie these flies. You might not be able to be quite as accurate, but just being able to crank them out and tie them so much faster is much nicer, I think. Then your last set of legs here, you want 3 sets. And this fly can be tied in a few different colors. Tan is probably the most popular, I'd say, but it can be tied in brown, olive, all kinds of different colors. And then once you get that last wrap in there, you can take your thread and just capture the brush with a couple of wraps. And you can get in here with your little wire cutters and trim out just the wire. Then you can lay down a couple more wraps just to make sure that it's not going anywhere, and that'll also help lay the material back. And I'll whip finish just right here at the eye with just a few turns. This isn't the final whip finish, because we're going to add the weed guards at the end. And then you'll kind of end up with just this moppy kind of mess. But don't worry. It'll all kind of come together here once we trim it. So the first thing to do is just do a final brush of all that material. Just really making sure that all the the fibers are, oopsie, fluffed up and none of them are trapped. There we go. And I like to take it out of the vise at this point. It's just a little easier to trim. I'll move my little trim basket here just in front of me. So what we're going to do is just kind of use our scissor points to kind of split some of the material to each side. Just come right down the middle of the back of the fly and lay the material to each side. And then we're just going to trim just a little channel, a thin channel, right down the back of the fly. And really all we're looking to do is trim the fibers that are kind of standing straight up off the back of the fly. I don't want to trim too many of the fibers at this point, just some of the ones that are standing right off the back of the fly. You want the majority of the fibers to be kind of pulled down to each side. So you can see there I just trimmed the top, so the majority of the fibers are going down to each side there. And now we're just going to do the same thing on the underside. You got to be real careful of all your legs. We did all that work to tie in those legs, make them look nice and pretty, so you got to be real careful that you don't cut your legs. So again, just get in there with the point of your scissors and kind of fold the material to each side. Be careful of your crab claws as well, the little strips of silky fibers we tied in at the back. Alright, now we're just going to do the same thing, trim just a little channel down the middle of the fly. Alright, now we have kind of this wafer thin little fly that we've trimmed on the bottom and on the top. So now we can tie or trim the edges of the fly. Now what you can do is, before you do that, is you can take your claws and just kind of quickly just do a quick roll there to make sure that you have distinction between your claws and your body. And then you can separate the legs from some of those body fibers. So I just kind of pull the legs down and out of the way while kind of pulling the fibers to the side there. Now, how I've seen Puglisi trim his is he kind of starts pretty close to the eye and kind of goes out just like that at first. So I've kind of trimmed, well, let's see if you can see, kind of trimmed close to the eye, and then I've gone out towards the back. And what you'll then do is kind of round that back edge towards the tail, or the claws I should say. So you'll end up with a little body that looks like that. Now you want to do the same exact thing on the other side here. So we'll just kind of do the same process where I just kind of pull the legs down and out of the way, and then pull some of those fibers through the legs. It can take a little bit of working, and sometimes if you can't go through the bottom or down on the fly, you can always pull the legs through the top. Actually, I think that's what I'm going to do, is pull them through the top, since these guys seem to be fighting me. And there's always a few little straggler fibers, and you can just fix those kind of as you find them. Believe it or not, sometimes you can just leave some of those straggler fibers, and it makes that fly just look a little more natural, a little crabbier. There's always a few fibers that kind of blend in with the claws as well, so you want to make sure if you have any of those long fibers that have kind of made their way in there to trim those out. There's always a few, and you can really trim all day long if you want, but at some point you do have to stop and just call it good enough. Believe it or not, these flies, I fished them pretty raggedy, pretty mangled, and they still do the job and catch fish. So at some point you just kind of have to stop and say, okay, that looks good enough. But I keep finding a few here that bother me, so I'm going to trim all that I can out. Alright, we'll call that good enough. Now that we have our little crab shape here, we're ready to trim the legs, so I just turn the fly upside down, grab the legs all together, and try not to pull them too much. You can give them a light stretch, but you really don't want to pull them too much, or else you'll get kind of some uneven legs. And you want to trim them pretty long, like 2 to 3 times the length of the shank of the hook. Or you can do it by the tail, where you take them all and pull them back to the length of the tail, or I guess the legs, or claws, I guess you could call them. But some of that's personal preference. You can always trim them a little longer than you think you'll need them, and then trim them shorter. Of course, you can't add length back on, but you can take some off. So just keep that in mind when you trim them. Now we'll put the fly upside down in our vise, and we'll tie in the weed guard. You can also use this for kind of the final trim if you want. There's always a few little fibers that get trapped. And to tie in the weed guard, I'm just going to take my thread here, and we're going to tie it in right there at the eye. And I'm going to take some 20 or 16 pound hard mono. Just dropped it on the ground. We'll try that again here. And then I'm just going to take the mono and just kind of fold it into a little loop there, and I'm just going to take my thread. So all I've done is I've just taken that weed guard, put a little fold in it, and then just pinched each side on the side of the hook. This is how Puglisi ties in his weed guards. It's actually a pretty ingenious way to do it. Then he just wraps several wraps of thread there on the weed guard, and then he just takes the whole weed guard and pulls it up and back. Then he'll lay a few wraps right behind it to kind of prop it, but a very effective and just super simple way to wrap in a weed guard. Then you'll take your scissors and just trim the weed guard to the hook point, and then you can just whip finish right behind it. Just a really simple, easy way to tie in a weed guard. And then of course at the end here you can use some super glue. You can use the thin super glue as well to kind of throw down into the body there and really penetrate. But you want to make sure you put some all around the weed guard and the eyes. And you can take the thin stuff if you want and penetrate through the body. The thin stuff is just basically the pink bottle. Use a little applicator tip and just give it a squirt right down in the body, and that'll really make this fly extra durable. But a great little bonefish crab pattern. Also good for redfish and skinny water. Also permit in real skinny water. This fly lays nice and soft with that bead chain and sinks just kind of at the right rate for fish in a foot or two of water. But that is the EP micro crab. Kind of hard to see here. But it's a nice little crab pattern. There'll be a picture on the front of the video here that'll give you a better picture of the crab pattern, but it's a really fishy little crab. And that is the EP micro crab.